Second lesson of Unit 7, 1920s, Domestic and Foreign Politics and How Disillusionment with World War I Shaped U.S. Economic and Foreign Policy During the 1920s. Here comes Mr. Harding and a decade of Republicans. What's the choice? You can kind of see it here portrayed in the visual at the right in the 1920 election. Americans are being told, do you want the American flag or do you want the League of Nations flag? Again, as we've talked about before, American public is exhausted from World War I. The League of Nations creates divisions and fears. There's economic downturn, unemployment. There's riots in the streets regarding pay and strikes. Represented by unions who want higher pay, inflation, things of that nature. There's this big fear also of the communist influence in Russia and that maybe it's coming for America. And so we're tired of foreign affairs, and one of the key campaign issues of the 1920 election was collecting the Allied war loans that the United States gave to the British and the French and other countries. And those other countries are in economic dire straits as well. They're having a very hard time, but worse than the United States, partly because of the fact that they have these huge debts, but also they have lost huge numbers of people. And that's really bad for an economy when you have a lot of labor force lost and destruction to account for. And they would say to, and we're saying to the United States in some instances, well, maybe the United States should just forgive that money and those loans and forget about it, because look at the number of people that died for us compared to the United States. Look at our cost versus their cost. Your money is nothing compared to the lives and destruction that has been lost here on our societies. And so the United States should just forgive and forget that debt. That did not set well, and the promise here is to pay that, make sure that gets paid back. That is really important for you to remember here in the interwar time period, the 1920s. The 1920 election Republican Party campaign slogan is going to be a return to normalcy. It's definitely not a normal decade, but they want to get back to the days before progressivism and the whole idea of progressivism and reform, that kind of thing is going to go by the wayside. And as Republicans, they're not really going to enforce those progressive pieces of legislation that much, although it is still all there. They want to end the racial economic problems and labor problems that are going on there, the strikes, the Palmer raids, secure the country, and notice the slogan there in the sign, America First, right? So we see America First, again, that means kind of a pulling back, isolation, kind of a fit and similarity there in those two words and trains of thought. The election also has women voting for the very first time, with the 19th Amendment being passed on the heels of the World War I experience, and as a reward nationally for their efforts in helping support and fight the war. And so they're significant in that election. Also significant is the Democratic side, not so much the opponent, for Harding in the presidential race, but his running mate, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, really kind of comes to national attention here, not because of his name, but because of his speaking ability. Of course, his name was already on the national scene, a distant cousin of Teddy Roosevelt, but very active, very well spoken, and energetic. And his personality really comes through. We'll see that a little bit later. In this election, Eugene V. Debs runs for the presidency for the Socialist Party from jail. Maybe recall what that particular law was that was still in place in 1920. We kind of hit it on it in the first lesson of the unit that put him in jail, speaking out against the war. Socialists were very opposed to the war, big important idea there. Election results pretty sweeping, although notice the solid Democratic South, right, and the Republican, more industrial North and West. Here we're flipping to the other side, the West moving more toward the Republican side, getting back to the way things were. Technology is a huge component of the 1920s. Lots of technological change for that time period. It's the radio. This election is broadcast and the results of it over Pittsburgh's KDKA radio station for the first time. Significant, that radio station, in that new medium of information and communication. The Harding administration coming in at the beginning of the decade here was considered and is considered still to be one of the most corrupt in U.S. history. His cabinet were known as the Ohio Gang, tended to be people from Ohio that he knew. There's lots of scandals. He wasn't really well qualified. He was a candidate largely because he didn't have any bad history largely that anybody knew about, so there was nothing to attack him on so much there. But the crew that he hires is gaining some personal benefit out of their positions. Some of the key really good advisors that were going to be highlighted here in his cabinet are listed there, Herbert Hoover being one of them. But when he got into the job, he's basically was quoted as saying, "I knew this job was going to be too much for me." The biggest scandal of the time period was this scandal known as the Teapot Dome scandal. And it's a geographic formation out in Wyoming. There's lots of oil resources out there. And the Secretary of the Interior, a guy named Albert Fall, secretly leased or rented government oil reserves to owners to the owners of two oil companies in exchange for some cold hard cash to the number that you see right there under the table. It's found out he's convicted of bribery, put in prison, and he's going to be the first cabinet member to go to prison in U.S. history, the Teapot Dome scandal. Harding dies in 1923. He suffers a heart attack. Coolidge is sworn in at home. In the middle of the night, he's woken up, and he's going to finish 1 year of Harding's term. The interesting thing here is that his father, Justice of the Peace, swears him in. He's from Vermont. And this Harding fellow is not really a big personality, nor was really Harding for the most part, although Harding was very much a socialite. Coolidge is very much an introvert, but extremely, extremely high regards for his honesty and his reputation personally. And so one of the things that is key here in the 1920s is the economy of the 1920s. It's shifting over into a new type of economy. There is this trend into businesses and small businesses that aren't industry, that aren't blue-collar workers. The new economy for the younger generations of men was a different thing. It's focused on more not just physically hard skills, what you can do, but what it is that it takes to organize a company and to promote a company and to sell things, right? The 1920s are very much about marketing and selling things a lot. And that's been building for a while, but the 1920s really reflect a lot of that. And some of the things that were promoted at the time were to be the self-made man, right? The businessman in the suit. Many of these young men being veterans from World War I, who, if they were from the rural countryside, are no longer disinterested in the countryside. They've seen Paris, they've seen Europe, and they're more interested in the hustle and the bustle of the big city. But personal qualities like thrift, hard work, persistence, and reliability. Henry Ford was fond of saying, a saying that goes, "Chop your own wood and it'll warm you twice." And so it's this theme of rugged individualism and work ethic, but also moral qualities, work qualities in here. That last bullet, very important. In an address to the American Society of Newspaper Editors in Washington, D.C. in 1925, part of his message there involved business. And the business of the 20s is kind of almost in a way becomes the religion of the 20s, make money and big business. After all, the chief business of American people is business. They are profoundly concerned with producing, buying, selling, investing, and prospering in the world. He went on to say that in all the experience, the accumulation of wealth means the multiplication of schools, the increase of knowledge, the dissemination of intelligence, the encouragement of science, the broadening of outlook, the expansion of liberties, the widening of culture, but of course the accumulation of wealth cannot be justified as the chief end of our existence, but we're compelled to recognize it as a means to well nigh every desirable achievement. So long as wealth is made the means and not the end, we need not greatly fear it. Right? So make money is the theme of the 1920s, but the process of which it happens, success highlighted here in some motivational posters and advertisements and things that companies would buy from the two companies you see there, just a couple of them, portraying what it takes to be successful, right? And I think those things really do apply yet today, quite a bit. So Coolidge is going to fire a good number of the cabinet members from the Harding administration. They're too corrupt for him, too dishonest. However, he does keep this guy by the name of Mellon, Hoover, and Hughes. And a couple of these particular phrases here, are especially the one right here, is something that really, I think, fits that Coolidge fellow. Our 1920s are the decade of Republican presidents. Now, we've only really had a couple Democrats in office since Abraham Lincoln in 1860 being elected. Grover Cleveland, 2 separate non-consecutive terms, and 2 terms for Woodrow Wilson. Otherwise, everything else is about Republicans. So for that reason, most of the time period, with the exception of our progressive era, had few regulations or efforts always being put in place, notice the red R's, to keep regulations low and raise tariff. Remember, Republican raised, Democrat down. Right, now the tariffs were lower in the progressive era, especially under Wilson, than ever before. But now in the 1920s, they are going to reach new highs. And so Coolidge business, and the theme of the time period here is back to laissez-faire. Do nothing, let the economy grow, let big business industry do its thing. As they are free to operate, they're going to have more opportunity to create wealth and jobs, and more jobs means more money in more Americans' pockets, and hopefully a lot less strikes and strife, right? Let business take advantage of the prosperous time. So there is 1919, 1920, 1921, there is this hard economic time, high inflation and things like that. But as the 20s move on, things start to shift in a different direction. The one person we're going to talk about here in terms of the economy, the Secretary of the Treasury, a guy by the name of Mellon, is a banker and industrialist, Andrew Mellon, and he is given several goals. One, he is told, balance the budget, make sure that we're not spending more than we take in taxes, reduce government debt from the war. There are loans taken out with that as well. And he's going to do this. Now, this seems, I want you to pay attention to this, really pay attention to this, put a star by it. This means that they want to, or what they want to do is cut taxes. Now, this seems weird, right? If you're going to pay off debts, how do you cut taxes, take in less money to pay off the debt? Well, the idea here is that we're going to increase the supply of money, supply side economics. If it's not in your notes, make sure you write it down. This is very much kind of what the farmers and the Grangers were talking about. And the Populist Party, they wanted to increase the supply of paper money and or silver in the system to inflate prices to get money flowing. Well, the idea here is less taxes. There's going to be more economic growth. Less taxes means more money in your pocket, your paycheck, to buy and spend it on things. And so in that way, there's going to be more buying and selling and income to tax, right? So we're talking about a volume of exchanges here, and the volume of wealth being generated. There's more money to tax is the idea in the end. Now, this is highly controversial, right, in terms of this actually playing out. But this is supply side economics in a different way. We're not printing money, but we are cutting taxes. And who they're cutting taxes are on is everybody, largely, as you see there. But it goes from a 75% tax rate to a 25% tax rate on the wealthiest Americans, and most average Americans go from a 4 to a 0.5% tax rate in that time period. So you can kind of see what that looks like in the big picture of things on the chart. And so less taxes, it means that supposedly there will be a increase in business. When a business has more money in its pocket, not giving it to the government, taxes, they're going to spend it on more R&D, research and development. The new iPhone 62X 2.0 3D, right? The new thing, that new phone that, for example, Apple might be making someday that you have no idea you really need, but when it comes out, you're going to say, yeah, I need it. It's going to cost me a ton, but it's going to butter my bread, and it's going to fold my clothes, and it's going to do my homework for me. I got to have it. That's what businesses want to come up with to make money, create sales. And so people are therefore going to see these things happening with businesses coming up with new stuff. And the idea is hopefully they'll buy more stocks in that particular country, which that company then would also put into research and development. People are going to buy more products. If people are buying these things, that means jobs, right? And so jobs means money in people's
pockets and to buy gadgets, wadgets, and thingamajigs, and the economy is going to expand even more, right? More jobs. And so because of this, because there are more jobs, here's where the supply side economic theory is coming in. Because of number 4, the government can collect more taxes because of the amount of income increasing because of this increase in jobs. And that means that there is going to be, if you come up with some rough numbers, right? If you tax 75% of 1.5 billion, it's a smaller number taken in revenue by the government than $4.5 billion in income taxed at 30%. So therefore, the idea is that you can pay off the debt that way, all right? But now this is based on, and I don't know if this is in your notes or not. If not, please write it down. This is based on the idea that there is a trickle-down effect, right? This is the theory of the trickle-down effect. Now, this is really highly criticized today yet, and really doesn't seem to be a lot of research to say that this happens to a great degree or that it happens very quickly at all. But the idea is that the businessmen and the wealthy people at the top will bring and flow their wealth down to you and I or common people, and everybody will be prosperous, right? Now, we'll talk about more of that later when we get to the Great Depression. How much of that does trickle down? Always thinking about human nature and the interests of one particular group of people versus another. The Ford-McCumber Act Tariff Act is passed in 1922. Again, Republicans they increased the tariffs to some of the all-time highs in our history, from 27% to 38%. Duties on tax and farm produce were actually increased on foreign imports into the country. So this is one of the first times that this kind of does happen for farmers. Prior to this, not too often were there tariffs for foreign agricultural goods to protect the American farmers. So the 1920s are not going to be too bad once we get out of the couple years after the war for American farmers. For a little while, 1930s is going to be a different story. So this is significant also in that there's kind of a rebound effect here with these tariffs, right? The problem with the world scenario post-World War I time period here is that this is going to hurt European and foreign economies, right? The United States is a major player in the world at this time. We are lending more money out to people than we're borrowing. And so that means they need to pay those debts back. Here we're talking about debts specifically from World War I that we gave to, loans that we gave to people, Britain and France in World War I. And so because they can't sell stuff easily to Americans because there's a high tax on it before it even gets into the country, then European countries like Britain and France have trouble making money. Therefore, they have trouble paying back the debt owed to the United States. So kind of like you see here on the visual on the bottom and right, there's kind of a retaliation that goes on here when one country puts a higher tariff on goods from a particular country coming into the tariff raising country, then there is kind of a tit for tat. There's kind of a hit you back with tariffs and restrictions too. So see how you like it, kind of a thing. So if we can't sell there, you're not going to sell here, or we're going to make it tougher for you to sell here because we're going to put a tax on it to match it. And so this is also going to hurt neighboring Europeans, other European countries. The 20s will be prosperous for a while, but in the rest of the world, in Europe, prosperous for the United States, but the rest of the world in Europe, especially Germany, it's not that great a time. It's a challenging time, and this is going to create problems in terms of the world economy. The 1924 election, in which Coolidge tries to run for and does run for his own term in office, sees the conditions of things as just perfect, really. Taxes are low, interest rates are low, the economy is booming, there's support for big business. The United States owns 40% of the world's wealth, and Coolidge wins easily. Keep cool with Coolidge. He's kind of known as the do-nothing president. Some people joked, if he died, would you know he was dead? That kind of thing. Took a lot of naps, hardly said a thing. Very tough on reporters and the media because he wouldn't give them anything juicy to talk about. He's basically just a hands-off kind of a president. The 1924 election, very similar to the previous one, 1920. Coolidge wins very easily. Notice the one state up here in Wisconsin that did go for a progressive president there. You might recognize the name by the name of Follett. and La Follette, the progressive out of Wisconsin, and Coolidge is in for his own 4 years in office. So isolation, trade, and arms control. So we talked about the domestic impact of the war and returning back to a conservative agenda and the domestic economy, domestic economic policy, not really pushing a lot of rules and regulations from the progressive era, lowering taxes, things like that. But now, again, we're not part of the League of Nations. And so how is it that we promote economic growth and prosperity and without some sort of guarantee that there's peace, right? If we're not part of the League of Nations, how is it that we can maintain peace to maximize the prosperity? The Allies owe us big money. We're a dominant economic power. Can we really isolate if we have other people owing us money? Well, no, the relationship is still there. So the economic connections are going to influence the political connections. We really can't and aren't and haven't been for a while isolated. Right. So how, again, can we promote peace if we're not in the League of Nations? Well, the economic policy, one, we're increasing the tariffs. So this is going to create problems in the long run. This makes it difficult, as I talked about before, for countries to pay back their debts. In particular, Germany here is also going to have a hard time because of this. We're going to promote our arms control agreements that are paper treaties. They're going to be labeled paper treaties, and this is going to be some of your left side research. That'll not take you too long here. Treaties with other countries outside of the League of Nations to help promote and be a leader in the world scene in generating a lasting peace. And so we're going to also mediate conflicts between countries. In particular, there is going to be a problem for Germany in paying back their loans, and that problem almost resulted in France invading Germany again, resulting in perhaps the potential for another conflict, which nobody wanted to have happen again. And so because Britain and France were having trouble paying back U.S. loans, partly because of high tariffs, Germany was struggling to also repay their loans because of high tariffs. So the money that was being paid by Germany to the British and French was not getting there, and therefore the British and French are not getting their money to the United States. And the German economy is incredibly crippled. Now, you probably recall, I remember seeing information from your world history class about the unbelievable inflation rates in Germany, and people being basically collecting the German government just printing money until at 24 hours a day, and people being paid with having to go to the bank with feed sacks in order to collect their checks and collect their money, and actually burning the money in order to keep their homes warm. Really tough time for them. And so the United States steps in with a representative by the name of Dawes to offer a refinancing plan to keep the money flowing, to keep everybody happy, to keep the peace. And this is different than the Dawes Severalty Act, 1886, 1887, involving Native Americans. Don't get it confused with that. But basically, the United States is going to give loans to Germany to help them with their payments, to keep the flow of money coming back to the United States and pay back U.S. bankers. Kind of a weird kind of a scheme, right? And so make sure you know that to keep the peace. There's actually going to be another refinancing later on in the 1920s because there's still a problem. Your reflection here on the left-hand side, there's a quick outline that'll review some of those paper treaties and those attempts at keeping the international peace. Make sure you go through and read through that. This is foreign policy and highly important on the EOC exam as well. The details of the treaty, what did it call for, who was involved, what were the problems and the weaknesses with each one of them. Definitely know that. And then the left-hand side in your notebook, you've got this little close reading to go ahead and write in by hand and use the stem there at the bottom to respond to your essential question. That's the day for this lesson. Keep making the hay. Good day.